Hi everyone and welcome to our 18th episode of Brew Talk with Mr.Beer. My name is Robert Lewis, your host. I got Ashley back with me this week. We appreciate you taking the time to watch us today. Hope you learned something from the episode. Before we dive into our topic, let's talk about what we're drinking today. This is actually one of Ashley's creations.
Yes, it is a gluten-free milkshake IPA. We're calling it Optimus Lime. Is that coconut and lime and lactose sugar? It's very good.
Yes.
So
Keep an eye out for this down the road as we continue to expand out our gluten-free recipe lineup. So that kind of does dive into our topic today. We're talking about gluten-free brewing tips. So as many of you know, we launched 4 new gluten-free recipes about a few weeks ago. The first of many to come, obviously. This will be one of them. And they're all just amazing beers, even if you don't drink gluten-free or if you drink regular beer. I'd still brew these beers. They're really good. I definitely drink my fair share in the office when I have other options to drink from.
he does.
But I guess one thing is that I've learned about the process is that brewing with gluten-free is a little different than brewing with regular stuff. You use different ingredients, you get different results. There could be some nuances to the brewing process.
Devil's in the details.
Yes, so we thought about having Ashley on to kind of just counter some of those details for when you're brewing with our recipes, or if you're brewing in gluten-free in general, just kind of what you can expect from that process. So the first part we have to cover, because it's just brewing in general, sanitization.
Yes, so sanitization is so important with brewing in general. It becomes especially important when you're brewing with gluten-free beer for 2 main reasons. The first reason is obviously cross-contamination. So if you're a conventional brewer and you're brewing with normal malt extracts that are made with barley, then that's something that you're definitely going to want to consider. How is your sanitation? Because if you're then going to switch gears and make a beer for someone with celiac or gluten sensitivity, then definitely your sanitization is going to become very important.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm sorry. I was ready.
One more thing. The other
so
reason is that in gluten-free wort, sometimes the yeast is not quite as happy. It comes back to yeast health, which we'll kind of dive into more later on in this topic, but definitely your yeast is a little bit weaker. It's not as healthy when you're putting it into a gluten-free wort, so you definitely want to make sure that you eliminate all possibilities of infection for that reason.
That works. So now that we've moved on from sanitization, so let's talk about hops. Ashley's our hop expert as well as our gluten-free expert.
Love hops.
So how are some ways to kind of help heavily hopped gluten-free beers and not get some kind of funky flavors out of those?
So heavily hopped beers, gluten-free or not, are more at risk for developing off flavors for a multitude of reasons. But I have learned through my extensive gluten-free brewing history that heavily hopped beers, especially when it comes to dry hopping and in conjunction with sorghum, can sometimes create more of an off flavor that we call diacetyl. And that can come off as butterscotch, it can come off as butter sometimes, and butter's great by itself. It's not necessarily something that you generally want in your hoppy beers. There are 3 main ways to kind of avoid this, and the first way is to make sure that your yeast is really healthy, and that comes down to giving it extra nutrition, which we'll talk about later as well, and because healthy yeast creates fewer off flavors, and that's just a thing kind of across the board with beer. Especially in higher gravity worts, this is going to be something that's important. If your yeast starts to get tired and it can't make it through all that sugar, then it does need a little bit of extra strength to kind of power it on and keep those off flavors from forming. The other one, of course, and I feel like this is pretty intuitive, is using fresh hops. So you're probably not going to want to use hops that have been sitting open on your countertop or in your fridge for a really long period of time that haven't been sealed to dry hop your gluten-free beers, because you could be setting yourself up for a potential problem. And again, that's true with any beer, so not just gluten-free. And the third preventative measure is going to be patience. Gluten-free beers do not like to be rushed. Sometimes it can be very tempting because you look at the beer itself and you don't see a lot of activity occurring, so you may have a tendency to panic a little bit and think, oh, I better pull it out and bottle it. Give it some time. If you're worried, pull off a small sample of your beer, put it in a sanitized, airtight container like a mason jar, stick it in the fridge overnight, and taste it the next morning. If you get any off flavors like butter or butterscotch, then you know that your beer is not ready to come out of the fermenter yet.
Good tip.
Yeah.
Pro tip. All right, so if someone wanted to increase like the mouthfeel or body in their gluten-free beer, how do they kind of go about doing that?
So you'll notice in a lot of our gluten-free recipes that we've included maltodextrin. Now the maltodextrin that we use is 100% corn derived. It's actually licensed under something called Clintos 10, and that is specifically only corn maltodextrin. So it is considered a gluten-free product. Now outside of Mr.Beer, you can use tapioca maltodextrin, which is often available at most health food stores and things like that. It does increase body and mouthfeel and will also help to give you a little bit of head retention because it does increase the viscosity of the beer. Same with oats. The oats in the stout recipe not only lend to that silky, velvety mouthfeel, but they also give that head something to kind of rest on.
Okay, so I think that ties into our next thing. Is one of the recipes has something called amylase enzyme in it. That's not something we include anywhere else. So kind of what is it and what does it do?
So you'll notice if you look on your jar of sorghum that it says in very small letters non-diastatic. And basically what that means is that that particular extract and gluten-free grains in general are non-diastatic. They don't have enzymatic activity of their own. So we have to give them extra enzymes to help them along. Otherwise we're going to end up with starch in our beer that is not converted. And that can lend to a shorter shelf life, and also you're not going to pull a lot of horsepower out of those steeping grains if you don't have those enzymes in there to help out a little bit. And fun fact, amylase enzyme is created in the human mouth quite a lot. So we provide you a non-spit based alternative.
That's good. That helps out. All right, so we mentioned earlier, let's talk about yeast. So in brewing gluten-free ingredients, how can like the yeast be affected and help out? I know there's some things you mentioned you might want to do.
So gluten-free wort lacks a lot of the things that yeast really enjoys eating in a typical wort. There are just things that just aren't there. Now that doesn't mean that it can't be done, because we do it all the time. I do it all the time. We just have to tweak a couple little things. One of the things that I really like doing that I feel like is extremely simple, rather than going out and buying a whole bunch of different yeast nutrients and energizers, which you can do, but what I recommend doing is keeping some old expired yeast around. Because if you, yeast's favorite thing to eat is itself. So if you use dead boiled yeast, meaning you take a packet of yeast or a tablespoon of yeast, we have a big jar that we put all of our old yeast in the brew room, and we'll just take a tablespoon of that and put it into our boils so that it's no longer active, but it provides a source of nutrition for the yeast itself that is viable, that we pitch later on. The other thing that I always recommend gluten-free homebrewers keep on hand besides old killed yeast is something called diammonium phosphate, or DAP. And basically what that is it's another nutrient for the yeast that kind of helps keep it energized, keep it in a healthy state, so it will continue to eat your wort, convert it into alcohol, and also not produce those off flavors that we spoke of.
Nice.
Yeah.
So now when it comes to bottling, sometimes you kind of mentioned this to me, that sometimes there can be some residual sweetness you can get when brewing. So kind of what's that about with gluten-free?
So with some of the higher SRM candy sugars, the darker ones, so like the 240 that we use in the stout, they can bring a little bit of residual sweetness even when they're basically fully fermented. So you may taste your wort and go, I don't know if I'm crazy or if there might be some sweetness there. And basically what it's doing is it's kind of mimicking some of the sweeter malts that are around. So we aren't working with, some of the malts that would lend that sweetness, some of those more crystal related things. We're working with what we have, which is candy sugar. And it does lend some of that sweet maltiness. So it's important then to use your hydrometer and also common sense. How long has it been? Am I seeing any activity? And then finally, what is my hydrometer reading? Am I close enough to my final gravity that we can go ahead and bottle? If you have questions about it, it's always good to test, wait a couple days, and then test again. If your gravity doesn't move, then you can pretty much rest assured that your beer is done.
Yep, and that's for all beers.
All beers.
Across the board
Yes.
when you're brewing.
And like I said, gluten-free beer, at the end of the day, it's still beer. We're still brewing it.
Still drinking it.
Still good. The devil's definitely in the details.
Yes. All right, so this is a kind of a different tip. So if you're going to brew like a gluten-free recipe for a friend of yours that is gluten-free and you're an already Mr.Beer brewer or just a brewer in general, kind of what do you need to think about or precaution to take with your equipment, your bottles, all that stuff to make sure that nothing's getting cross-contaminated.
Well, first of all, I always say if you're going to brew a gluten-free beer for somebody that actually has celiac disease, meaning like they're going to, if they consume something either through intentionally or through cross-contamination, they're going to become sick, you probably want to have a conversation with them. First and foremost, you want to ask them, okay, how sensitive are you? What do your reactions look like? Once that's determined, you can be a little bit more sure of how to progress forward. But I always say if you're brewing for someone with celiac, unless you have really advanced equipment to make sure that everything is under 20 parts per million, you're probably going to want to invest in a new LBK or a new fermenter, even a bucket, just to ensure their safety. Make sure your spoons, your plastic bottles have been cleaned and sanitized very well. And I would even go as far as to say, if you've used those plastic bottles in the past for regular beer, I would just go ahead and use glass or purchase new bottles for that individual. As someone who has celiac disease, I can tell you that the last thing that you want on your conscience is to make somebody sick. It doesn't feel nice for them, and it doesn't feel nice to be responsible for it anyway. So when in doubt, always err on the side of caution. At the end of the day, celiac disease is an autoimmune disease, and for the people that deal with it, it's major.
Yeah, definitely. All right, well, that's going to wrap it up for today. If you guys want to catch up on these tips, you can rewatch the video or go to Ashley's page, ashleysbrewing.com. At the very bottom, we have all these tips.
Don't be shy. Feel free to ask any questions too. Call in.
Well. Call in, don't mind. So we will be posting this video on our blog page, mrbeer.com/blog. We'll put the transcript on there. You can find it on our YouTube page, Facebook page, Instagram, and Twitter. If you enjoyed the video, just give us a thumbs up or a share or a comment or something so we know that you liked it, and we'll keep making them. Also, if you want to learn more about beer, talk with Ashley more, talk with Zach more, talk with fellow Mr. Beer brewers in general, join our Facebook group, Mr. Beer's Brewing Society. It's an awesome place to hang out, take pictures, a lot of information in there. You get some cool recipe ideas. We are throwing kind of some unique things in there as well that other people don't get. So if you want to see some behind the scenes stuff, catch some unique tips, maybe some sweet recipes, join the Facebook group. It's pretty simple. That wraps it up. We'll see you guys next week. Cheers, guys. Thank you.
Cheers.